The morning sun cast long shadows through the crystal windows of the Galactic Institute of Technology. Located on the peaceful planet Kepler 442b, the university was home to the brightest minds from across the galaxy. Students from dozens of different worlds walked through its halls every day. Li Huan adjusted his backpack and hurried toward the main lecture hall. He was running late for Professor Kang Minho's advanced quantum physics class. As the only human student at the institute, Huan already felt out of place most days. Being late would only make things worse. The lecture hall was massive, with seats arranged in circles that rose up toward the ceiling. Huan quietly slipped into an empty seat near the back. Around him sat students from many different worlds. The Yatid Valens looked like floating clouds of purple gas in their environmental suits. The Chithari resembled giant mantises with their green exoskeletons and clicking sounds. There were also the tall, gray-skinned Altarians with their 4 arms and crystal-like patches on their faces. At the front of the hall stood Professor Kang Minho, the most respected physics teacher at the institute. He was an Altarian, standing nearly 8 feet tall. His 4 arms moved gracefully as he wrote complex equations on the holographic display board. The crystal patches on his face glowed softly when he was thinking hard about something. Today we will discuss the fundamental limits of quantum communication, Professor Kang announced in his deep voice. The translation devices all students wore made sure everyone could understand him perfectly. Specifically, why faster-than-light communication across galactic distances remains impossible. Huan opened his notebook and began taking notes. He had always been fascinated by quantum physics, even though many of his alien classmates thought humans were too primitive to understand such advanced concepts. Professor Kang turned to face the class. As you all know, quantum entanglement allows 2 particles to share an instant connection, no matter how far apart they are. When something happens to one particle, the other particle responds immediately. This seems like it would allow instant eye communication across any distance. A Velan student raised one of its gaseous appendages. Professor, why can we not use this for communication between star systems? Excellent question, Professor Kang replied. His 4 arms gestured toward the display. The problem is quantum decoherence. When we try to maintain entangled particles across vast distances, especially through the chaos of space, the connection becomes unstable. The quantum states collapse before we can send meaningful information. The professor began drawing diagrams showing how quantum particles lost their connection over long distances. Our current hyperspace communication relays are the fastest method available. They can send messages across the galaxy in just a few weeks. But instant communication? Impossible. Huan frowned as he studied the equations on the display. Something about them seemed incomplete to him. He remembered reading about resonance effects in quantum systems back on Earth. His grandmother had once explained to him how sound could travel through different materials by finding the right frequency. The mathematical proof is quite clear, Professor Kang continued. We have tried every possible approach: quantum amplification, exotic matter manipulation, artificial wormhole creation. Nothing works. No faster method exists for galactic communication. Huan raised his hand. The gesture felt small in the huge lecture hall filled with alien beings who were supposedly much more advanced than humans. Professor Kang noticed him and paused. Yes, the human student. What is your question? Professor, Huan began carefully, what if we approached quantum entanglement differently? Instead of trying to force the connection to stay strong, what if we used resonance to amplify it naturally? A few Chithari students made clicking sounds that their translators turned into laughter. Professor Kang's crystal patches dimmed slightly, which Huan had learned meant the Altarian was either annoyed or amused. Young human, Professor Kang said, with a tone that sounded almost kind, but also condescending. I appreciate your enthusiasm. However, resonance amplification in quantum systems has been studied for over 2,000 years. The theoretical framework simply does not support such an approach. But what if we used harmonic frequencies to create stable resonance patterns? Juan pressed on, despite feeling his face grow warm with embarrassment. Like how sound waves can reinforce each other? This time, more students laughed. A tall, Altarian student in the front row turned around to look at Juan. "Primitive analogies from a Type 1 civilization," she whispered loudly enough for others to hear. Professor Kang held up one of his 4 hands for silence. "I understand that humans often think in terms of simple mechanical analogies," he said. "But quantum mechanics operates on principles that are far beyond such basic concepts. The mathematics involved require understanding that typically takes centuries for a species to develop." Juan felt his heart sink. The professor was not being mean, but his words stung. It was the same thing he heard almost every day at the Institute. Humans were too young, too primitive, too simple to understand advanced science. "The reason no faster method exists," Professor Kang continued, "is not because we have not been clever enough to find it. It is because the laws of physics themselves prevent it. Quantum decoherence increases exponentially with distance and environmental interference. No amount of amplification or resonance can overcome this fundamental limitation." He turned back to the display and began showing more complex equations. "These formulas have been verified by every major scientific institution in the galaxy. The Altarian Science Council, the Valon Research Collective, even the mysterious Void Dwellers agree on this point." Juan stared at the equations, but his mind kept drifting to memories of his grandmother. Park Suna had been a master potter on Earth. She used to tell him stories about how clay and metal could be shaped not through force, but through understanding their natural patterns. "Everything has its own rhythm," she would say. "Find the rhythm, and you can create harmony." The class continued for another hour. Professor Kang explained more about why faster-than-light communication was impossible. He showed historical examples of failed experiments and theoretical proofs that seemed unbreakable. When the lecture finally ended, students began filing out of the hall. Juan packed his notebook slowly, still thinking about what the professor had said. As he stood to leave, he heard whispers from other students. "Did you hear the human trying to solve galactic physics with sound wave analogies?" Typical primitive thinking. They always try to apply their simple Earth concepts to advanced science. "I heard humans still use chemical rockets to travel between planets in their own system." Juan walked out of the lecture hall with his head down. The corridors of the Institute suddenly felt cold and unwelcoming. He had come to this prestigious university hoping to learn from the galaxy's greatest minds. Instead, he felt like a child, trying to discuss mathematics with adults. But as he walked back toward his dormitory, something Professor Kang had said kept echoing in his mind. No faster method exists. The certainty in those words bothered him. In his experience, whenever someone said something was completely impossible, it usually meant they had not found the right way to think about the problem yet. That evening, Juan sat in his small dormitory room, staring at his quantum mechanics textbook. His roommate, a Chithari named Click 7, was working on his own assignments across the room. The sound of Click 7's claws tapping on his datapad created a steady rhythm that somehow reminded Juan of his grandmother's pottery wheel. Maybe the other students were right. Maybe he was just a primitive human trying to understand concepts beyond his species' capability. But deep down, something told him that Professor Kang's absolute certainty was wrong. There had to be another way to think about the problem. As the twin moons of Kepler 442b rose outside his window, Juan made a decision. He was going to prove that sometimes the most advanced minds could miss the simplest solutions. Juan stared at the ceiling of his dormitory room as the digital clock showed 11:47 p.m. Sleep would not come. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the laughter from his classmates and Professor Kang's dismissive words echoing in his mind. Click 7. His Chithari roommate noticed Juan tossing and turning in his bed. The insect-like alien stopped working on his assignment and turned toward his human friend. "Juan, you should rest," Click 7 said. His translator made his clicking sounds into careful, precise words. "Tomorrow there will be new classes, new chances to learn." "I cannot sleep," Juan replied, sitting up in his narrow bed. "I keep thinking about what Professor Kang said today, about how no faster method exists for quantum communication." Click 7's large compound eyes reflected the soft light from their desk lamps. "The professor is very wise. He has studied physics for over 300 years. Perhaps it is better to accept what the experts know." Juan swung his legs over the side of his bed. "But what if the experts are wrong? What if they are looking at the problem in the wrong way?" "Humans," Click 7 said with what sounded like affection, "always think they can solve problems that have puzzled the galaxy's greatest minds. It is both your greatest strength and your greatest weakness." Juan walked to his small desk and opened his quantum mechanics textbook. The pages were filled with complex equations and theories that took most species centuries to fully understand. Yet something about the established approach felt wrong to him. "Click 7, can I ask you something?" Juan said, not looking up from his book. "Of course. How does your species approach difficult problems? I mean, what is your natural way of thinking?" Click 7 made a series of rapid clicks that his translator converted into thoughtful words. "We analyze everything step by step. We break complex problems into smaller parts. We use logic and mathematics to find the correct solution. This is how all advanced civilizations think." Juan nodded slowly. "That makes sense. But what if that approach is missing something? What could it be missing? Logic is universal. Mathematics is the same everywhere in the galaxy." Juan closed his textbook and walked to the small cabinet where he kept his personal belongings from Earth. Inside was a wooden box that his grandmother had given him before he left for the institute. He had not opened it in months. The box contained some of his grandmother's old tools. There was a small metal hammer, some thin wire, and several pieces of shaped metal that she had used in her pottery work. At the bottom of the box was a letter she had written to him. Juan sat on his bed and read the letter again. His grandmother's handwriting was neat and careful, just like everything she did. "My dear grandson," the letter began, "you are going to study among the stars with beings much older and wiser than us humans. They will teach you many wonderful things. But remember this: wisdom is not just about knowing facts. True wisdom comes from understanding the harmony between all things." Juan remembered sitting in his grandmother's workshop as a child, watching her shape clay and metal into beautiful objects. She never used force. Instead, she would feel for the natural patterns in the materials. She would find their rhythm and work with it. "Everything has its own song," she used to tell him. "The clay sings one way, the metal sings another way. When you learn to hear their songs, you can make them sing together in harmony." At the time, young Juan had thought she was just being poetic. Now, sitting in his dormitory room on an alien world, her words seemed to carry deeper meaning. He picked up one of her metal tools. It was perfectly balanced in his hand. The surface was worn smooth from years of use. As he held it, he could almost hear his grandmother's voice telling him about the importance of understanding natural patterns. "Click 7, Juan said suddenly. "What if quantum entanglement works like music?" His roommate stopped what he was doing and looked at Juan with curiosity. "What do you mean?" Juan stood up and began pacing around their small room. "Think about... Music is about harmony and resonance. When two instruments play in harmony, they strengthen each other. But if they play the wrong notes, they create noise. I do not understand how this relates to quantum physics." Professor Kang said that quantum entanglement breaks down over long distances because of decoherence. But what if decoherence happens because we are not creating the right kind of harmony? Juan moved to his desk and started drawing rough sketches on a piece of paper. What if, instead of trying to force quantum particles to stay connected, we created a system that naturally resonates with their quantum frequencies? Click 7 approached and looked at Juan's drawings. They looked nothing like the complex scientific diagrams in their textbooks. Instead, they resembled the flowing patterns found in traditional Korean art. These drawings look very primitive, Click 7 said, though not unkindly. Where are the mathematical formulas? Where are the quantum field equations? Maybe that is the problem, Juan replied. Maybe we have been making this too complicated. What if the solution is simpler than everyone thinks? He continued drawing, his hand moving almost automatically. The patterns seemed to flow from some deep memory of watching his grandmother work. She had always said that the most beautiful pottery came from understanding the natural shape that the clay wanted to take. What if quantum particles want to stay connected? Juan mused. What if our job is not to force them, but to create the conditions where they can maintain their natural harmony? Click 7 watched as Juan covered several pages with his strange drawings. Even if your idea has merit, how would you build such a device? We are students, not master engineers. Juan looked at his grandmother's tools again. She used to say that the best craftsmen work with simple tools and deep understanding. Maybe I do not need advanced equipment. Maybe I just need to understand the right pattern. He opened his quantum mechanics textbook again, but this time he looked at the equations differently. Instead of seeing them as mathematical proofs of what was impossible, he saw them as descriptions of natural patterns, patterns that might have a hidden harmony. Click 7, can you help me with something? What do you need? I want to visit the engineering lab tonight. I know students are not supposed to be there after hours, but I need to see what materials are available. Click 7's compound eyes seemed to widen. Juan, that could get us in serious trouble. If we are caught, I know the risks, but I have an idea, and I need to try it tonight while it is still clear in my mind. His roommate was quiet for several moments. Finally, he made a series of soft clicks that sounded almost like sighing. Humans truly are the strangest species in the galaxy. Very well, I will help you. But if we are expelled from the Institute, I am blaming you. Juan smiled for the first time since the morning's lecture. Thank you, my friend. As they prepared to sneak out of their dormitory, Juan carefully packed his grandmother's tools in a small bag. He had no clear plan, just an intuition that there was a different way to think about quantum entanglement, a way that involved harmony instead of force, resonance instead of brute mathematical power. The corridors of the Institute were quiet at this hour. Most students were either sleeping or studying in their rooms. Security was light, since the Institute was located on a peaceful world with very little crime. They reached the engineering lab without being seen. Click 7 used his natural ability to pick locks, something that came easily to his species. The lab was filled with equipment and materials from dozens of different worlds. Juan looked around at all the advanced technology. For a moment, he felt overwhelmed. How could he, a simple human student, hope to solve a problem with such basic tools and primitive thinking? But then he remembered his grandmother's words about listening to the natural song of materials. He closed his eyes and tried to feel for the right pattern, the right harmony that would allow quantum particles to sing together across the vastness of space. Somewhere in this room full of alien technology and his grandmother's simple tools, there was an answer waiting to be discovered. Juan just had to find the courage to trust his instincts and think like a human, not like an imitation of his more advanced alien classmates. The night was still young, and he had work to do. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the windows of Professor Kang Minho's office as he prepared for another day of classes. His 4 arms moved efficiently as he organized his research papers and updated his lecture notes. The crystal, Patches on his face glowed softly in the morning light. Professor Kang had been teaching quantum physics for over 3 centuries. In all that time, he had never encountered a problem that could not be solved through proper mathematical analysis and logical thinking. Yesterday's interruption from the human student had been mildly amusing, but nothing more. A knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, expecting to see one of his research assistants. Instead, Li Huan stepped into the office. The young human looked tired, as if he had not slept all night. His clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. In his hands, he carried a small metallic device and a data pad. "Professor Kang," Huan said nervously, "I hope I am not bothering you too early, but I wanted to show you something before classes begin today." Professor Kang's 4 eyes studied the human student with mild curiosity. "What is it that could not wait until regular office hours, young human?" Huan placed the metallic device on Professor Kang's desk. It was roughly spherical, about the size of a human fist, and appeared to be made from common materials available in any engineering lab. The surface had intricate patterns carved into it, but they looked more like decorative art than scientific instruments. "I have been thinking about what you said yesterday," Huan began, "about how no faster method exists for quantum communication across galactic distances." Professor Kang leaned back in his chair. "And you believe you have found an error in centuries of established physics?" "Not an error," Huan said carefully. "Just a different way of looking at the problem." He activated his datapad and showed Professor Kang a series of readings. This device successfully maintained quantum entanglement between 2 particles across a distance of 15 kilometers. The connection remained stable for over 6 hours, with 0 decoherence. Professor Kang's crystal patches flickered with interest despite himself. 15 kilometers was not an impressive distance by galactic standards, but maintaining perfect stability for 6 hours was unusual. "Show me your data collection methods," he said. Huan explained how he had set up his test. One device remained in the engineering lab while he carried its twin to the far side of the campus. Throughout the night, he had sent simple binary signals back and forth. Every signal had transmitted instantaneously with no degradation. "Interesting," Professor Kang admitted. "But 15 kilometers is hardly galactic communication. Our current systems can maintain quantum links for much greater distances before decoherence sets in." "That is true," Huan agreed. "But Professor, look at this reading." He pointed to a specific measurement on his data pad. The quantum connection actually grew stronger over time, not weaker. The resonance effect built up harmonically instead of breaking down. Professor Kang's 4 arms reached for the device, examining it from all angles. The construction was simple, almost primitive by galactic standards. Yet the internal geometry was surprisingly complex, with metal structures arranged in patterns that seemed to follow no conventional engineering principles. "How does it work?" Professor Kang asked. Huan took a deep breath. "Instead of trying to force quantum particles to maintain their entanglement, I created a resonance chamber that amplifies their natural connection. The patterns inside are based on harmonic frequencies that strengthen rather than interfere with quantum states." "That is theoretically impossible," Professor Kang said automatically. "Quantum decoherence increases with distance due to environmental interference. No amount of resonance can overcome fundamental physical limitations." "But what if we have been thinking about it wrong?" Huan asked. "What if quantum particles want to stay connected, and our job is just to give them the right environment to do so?" Professor Kang set the device down and activated his own diagnostic equipment. Advanced Altarian sensors began scanning Huan's invention from every possible angle. Electromagnetic readings, quantum field measurements, gravitational distortion, analysis, every test he could think of. The results made no sense. According to his instruments, the device was somehow creating a stable pocket of space-time around itself. Within this pocket, quantum particles maintained their entanglement as if they were right next to each other, regardless of actual distance. This cannot be correct, Professor Kang muttered. He ran the diagnostics again. The readings were identical. Professor, Juan said quietly, would you like to see a live demonstration? Without waiting for an answer, Juan activated the device on Professor Kang's desk. He then pulled out a small communicator and spoke into it. Click 7, can you hear me? A voice came from the device on the desk immediately. Yes, Juan, I can. Hear you perfectly. The connection is crystal clear. Professor Kang stared at the device. There had been no delay, no static, no sign of signal processing time. The communication was truly instantaneous. Where is your roommate right now? Professor Kang asked. He is in our dormitory on the other side of campus, Juan replied. About 23 kilometers from here. Professor Kang's crystal patches began pulsing rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. He grabbed his own communication device and tried to contact his research laboratory using conventional methods. The signal took several seconds to connect and process, but Juan's device had transmitted instantly across the same distance. This is impossible, Professor Kang whispered. You are using standard quantum entanglement principles, but somehow avoiding decoherence completely. It is possible, Juan said. I just had to stop thinking like everyone else and start thinking like a human. Before Professor Kang could respond, there was another knock on his office door. Dr. Yoon Ji-hai, the head of the theoretical physics department, entered without waiting for permission. She was one of only 3 humans on the institute's faculty, and her reputation for brilliance was known throughout the galaxy. Min-ho, she said to Professor Kang, I have been getting some very interesting readings from my quantum monitoring equipment. There appears to be stable quantum activity coming from this building. Do you know anything about this? Professor Kang gestured helplessly toward Juan and his device. Dr. Yoon, I believe you should see this demonstration for yourself. For the next hour, Dr. Yoon subjected Juan's device to every test she could imagine. She brought in additional equipment from her own laboratory. She called in colleagues from other departments. Every test confirmed the same impossible result. The device was maintaining perfect quantum entanglement across significant distances with no sign of decoherence. Juan, Dr. Yoon said finally, can you explain to me exactly how you developed this technology? Juan told them about his grandmother's teachings regarding harmony and resonance. He explained how he had approached quantum entanglement as a problem of creating the right environmental conditions rather than forcing particles to behave in unnatural ways. You treated quantum mechanics like pottery? Professor Kang asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Not exactly like pottery, Juan corrected. But I used the same principles my grandmother taught me about working with natural patterns, instead of fighting against them. Dr. Yoon examined the device's internal structure again. The mathematical principles are sound, she admitted. But the approach is completely different from anything in our literature. You have created artificial harmony in quantum space. How far do you think this technology could work? Professor Kang asked. Juan shrugged. I do not know yet. But if the resonance effect continues to build harmonically, there might not be a distance limit at all. The quantum connection could theoretically work across the entire galaxy. Professor Kang sat down heavily in his chair. His 4 arms hung limply at his sides. For over 3 centuries, he had taught students that faster-than-light communication was impossible. He had built his entire career on the mathematical certainty that no faster method could exist. And now a first-year human student had proven him wrong with a device built from spare parts and pottery-making principles. Dr. Yoon, Professor Kang said quietly, I think we need to contact the Galactic Council immediately. Dr. Yoon nodded. This discovery will change everything. Instant communication across galactic distances will revolutionize trade, diplomacy, military strategy, scientific collaboration. The implications are staggering. She turned to Juan, who was still standing nervously beside Professor Kang's desk. Young man, do you understand what you have accomplished? Juan looked at his simple device, then at the two distinguished professors who were staring at him with a mixture of amazement and concern. I just wanted to prove that sometimes there is a faster method, he said simply. My grandmother always told me that impossible just means nobody has found the right harmony yet. Outside Professor Kang's office window, the campus of the Galactic Institute continued its normal morning routine. Students hurried to classes. Professors prepared their lectures, and research continued in laboratories across the complex. But in one small office, 3 people stared at a simple metallic sphere that would soon change the course of galactic civilization forever. The age of instant communication was about to begin, thanks to a human who had dared to think differently about an impossible problem. Within 3 hours of Dr. Yoon's emergency communication to the Galactic Council, Juan's quiet dormitory room had become the center of unprecedented attention. Security officers from 6 different star systems stood guard outside his door. Representatives from major galactic powers filled the Institute's corridors, all demanding immediate audiences with the human student who had changed physics forever. Juan sat on his narrow bed, feeling overwhelmed by the chaos surrounding him. Click 7 paced nervously around their small room, his claws clicking anxiously on the floor. I told you this would bring trouble, Click 7 said. Now look what has happened. Our room is surrounded by the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Through their window, Juan could see news ships from dozens of worlds hovering above the campus. Reporters from every major species were broadcasting live updates about the breakthrough that would revolutionize galactic communication. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Dr. Yoon entered, followed by a tall human man in formal, diplomatic clothing. Juan, Dr. Yoon said, I would like you to meet Ambassador Kim Dae-ho. He has traveled here directly from Earth to ensure your safety and protect human interests. Ambassador Kim stepped forward with a serious expression. Mr. Lee, the Earth government is very proud of your achievement. However, we are also concerned about your well-being. There are many powerful forces that would like to control your technology. I do not understand, Juan said. I just built a communication device. Why is everyone so excited? Dr. Yoon sat down in the room's only chair. Juan, instant galactic communication will change everything. Trade routes that currently take months to coordinate could be managed in real time. Military operations could be planned across multiple star systems simultaneously. Scientific research could be shared immediately between institutions on opposite sides of the galaxy. Ambassador Kim nodded gravely. And that means your invention is worth more than the entire economic output of most star systems. Every major power wants to control it. As if to prove his point, another knock came at the door. A security officer entered and announced that representatives from the Altarian Science Directorate were demanding an immediate meeting. Behind him stood 3 tall Altarians with formal government insignia. The lead Altarian stepped forward. I am Director Shin. Wu Sung of the Science Directorate, we must discuss the implications of this human's discovery immediately. The boy is under Earth's protection, Ambassador Kim said firmly. Any discussions must go through proper diplomatic channels. Director Shin's crystal patches pulsed with irritation. This technology could destabilize the current balance of power in the galaxy. The Altarian Republic has maintained peace for over 1,000 years through careful control of information flow. Instant communication could destroy that stability. Before anyone could respond, another commotion erupted in the hallway. A group of Valen representatives had arrived, their environmental suits making soft humming sounds as they moved. Behind them came delegates from the Chithari Collective, and even a mysterious figure in dark robes who claimed to represent the Void Dwellers. Dr. Yoon stood up with visible frustration. This is a university, not a diplomatic summit. These meetings should be taking place at the Galactic Council headquarters. The technology is here, Director Shin replied. The inventor is here. This is where decisions must be made. Juan felt increasingly uncomfortable as more alien officials crowded into the hallway outside his room. Everyone was talking about him as if he were not present, discussing his invention like it was a weapon rather than a communication tool. "Excuse me," Juan said loudly, causing the room to fall silent. "Can I ask something?" All eyes turned to him. The representatives of multiple galactic powers waited to hear what the young human would say. "Why is everyone treating this like it is dangerous?" Juan asked. "Better communication should help everyone understand each other. Why would that destabilize anything?" The Velan representative spoke through its translator. "Young human, you do not understand the delicate balance that maintains galactic peace. Information control has prevented wars for centuries. If every system can communicate instantly with every other system, conflicts could spread faster than they can be contained. But it could also help solve conflicts faster," Juan pointed out. "If leaders can talk to each other immediately, maybe they can solve problems before they become wars." Director Shin made a dismissive gesture with two of his forearms. "Primitive thinking. Peace requires careful management of information flow. Too much communication too quickly leads to chaos." Ambassador Kim stepped protectively closer to Juan. "The Earth government believes that better communication leads to better understanding. We support the peaceful development of this technology." "And who will control this development?" asked the mysterious Void Dweller representative. Their voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Will Earth claim ownership of galactic communication? Will humans become the gatekeepers of information flow?" "I never said anything about controlling it," Juan protested. "I just wanted to solve a physics problem." Dr. Yoon held up her hands for silence. "Everyone needs to calm down. This young man has made a scientific breakthrough, not started a war. We should be celebrating, not arguing about control." But the arguments continued. Each representative presented their species' concerns about how instant galactic communication would affect existing power structures. The Altarians worried about losing their role as information brokers. The Velans feared that faster communication would lead to faster conflicts. The Chithari wanted to ensure that the technology would not disadvantage their collective decision-making processes. Meanwhile, Professor Kang had arrived with disturbing news. "I have been monitoring galactic news feeds," he announced. "Word of the breakthrough has spread faster than we expected. There are already reports of increased military activity in several border regions. Some systems are demanding immediate access to the technology, while others are calling for it to be suppressed entirely." Juan felt a growing sense of dread. His simple desire to prove his professor wrong had somehow created a galactic crisis. "What can we do?" he asked. Ambassador Kim placed a reassuring hand on Juan's shoulder. "First, we ensure your safety. Then we work with reasonable parties to develop this technology responsibly." "Define reasonable," Director Shin said coldly. "Will humans share this technology freely? Or will Earth use it to gain advantages over other species? Will other species accept human leadership in galactic affairs?" countered the Velan representative. Click 7, who had been quiet throughout the discussions, suddenly spoke up. "May I make an observation?" Everyone turned to look at the young Chitauri student. "You are all arguing about control and power," he said, "but you are missing the most important point. This technology works because a human thought differently than the rest of us. If you try to control it the same way you control everything else, you might destroy what makes it special." His words created an uncomfortable silence in the room. "The Chithari student makes a valid point," Dr. Yoon said, thoughtfully. "Juan's breakthrough came from approaching the problem with human intuition and cultural wisdom. If we immediately subject it to traditional galactic politics, we might lose the very creativity that made it possible." Outside the window, more news ships continued to arrive. Reports were coming in of emergency sessions being called in government centers across the galaxy. Some systems were already beginning to position military forces near strategic communication hubs, fearing that instant communication technology could be used as a weapon. Juan looked at his simple device, which sat quietly on his desk amid all the chaos. Just yesterday morning, he had been a struggling student trying to prove his professor wrong. Now he was at the center of a galactic political crisis. "What happens next?" he asked quietly. Ambassador Kim exchanged glances with Dr. Yoon and Professor Kang. "That depends on many factors," he said carefully. "But whatever happens, Earth will protect your right to continue your research and education." Director Shin's crystal patches flickered ominously. "Protection may not be enough. This technology has already changed the balance of power in the galaxy. The question now is whether that change will lead to progress or chaos." As if summoned by his words, urgent alarms began sounding throughout the Institute. Emergency broadcasts announced that 3 separate border conflicts had erupted in the past hour, all apparently triggered by fears about communication technology. Advantages. Juan's breakthrough, intended to solve an academic problem, had inadvertently pushed the galaxy toward a crisis that threatened the peace that had lasted for over 1,000 years. The age of instant communication was beginning, but it was starting with confusion, fear, and the possibility of war. The main auditorium of the Galactic Institute had never hosted such an important gathering. Representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy filled the massive hall. News crews from dozens of worlds broadcasted live as beings who normally communicated through diplomatic channels for months sat together in one room. At the center of the stage stood a simple podium with Juan's communication device sitting beside it. The young human stood nervously behind the podium, looking out at an audience that included some of the most powerful individuals in galactic civilization. Dr. Yoon sat in the front row, offering Juan an encouraging smile. Ambassador Kim stood nearby, ready to step in if the situation became dangerous. Professor Kang sat with other faculty members, still looking stunned by how quickly his quiet physics class had become the center of galactic attention. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all classifications," Dr. Yoon announced as she introduced the presentation, "we are here today to learn directly from Li Huan about his revolutionary communication technology. I ask that you listen with open minds to what may be a very different approach to scientific thinking." Juan stepped up to the podium and activated the translation system. His voice would be heard simultaneously in dozens of different languages across the galaxy. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice slightly shaky with nerves. 3 days ago, I was just a student trying to understand quantum physics. I never intended to create something that would cause so much excitement and worry." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Many of the alien representatives had expected a formal scientific presentation with complex mathematics and detailed technical specifications. "Before I explain how the device works," Juan continued, "I want to tell you about my grandmother, Park Suna." Director Shin of the Altarian Science Directorate leaned forward in his seat, confused by this unexpected direction. "My grandmother was a potter on Earth," Juan said. "She made beautiful bowls and vases from clay and metal. When I was young, I would sit in her workshop and watch her work. She taught me that everything has its own natural rhythm." The Valen representative made a soft humming sound that indicated confusion. Through their translator, they asked, "How? Does pottery relate to quantum physics?" Juan smiled slightly. "That is exactly what I wondered for many years. But when I was struggling with Professor Kang's statement that no faster communication method exists, I remembered something my grandmother used to say." He picked up his device and held it carefully in both hands. "She told me that when you try to force materials to do something against their nature, they break. But when you understand their natural patterns and work with them, they can do amazing things." Professor Kang shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had spent centuries using mathematical force to solve physics problems. The idea of working with natural patterns rather than against them was completely foreign to his training. Most approaches to quantum communication try to force entangled particles to maintain their connection across long distances, Juan explained. But particles do not want to be forced. They want to flow in harmony with the quantum fields around them. He activated the device, and its soft humming filled the auditorium. This device does not force anything. Instead, it creates an environment where quantum particles can naturally maintain their connection, like a perfect pottery kiln that allows clay to become its strongest possible form. The mysterious Void Dweller representative spoke from their position at the back of the hall. "Show us the mathematics behind this harmony." Juan nodded and activated a holographic display. But instead of the complex equations everyone expected, the display showed simple wave patterns that looked almost like music. Traditional quantum physics uses mathematical equations to describe particle behavior, Juan said. But I approached it like my grandmother approached pottery. I listened for the natural rhythm of the quantum field. He pointed to the wave patterns on the display. These are not complex calculations. They are the natural frequencies that quantum particles prefer to vibrate at. When I built the device to match these frequencies, the particles stayed connected because it felt natural to them. The Chithari representative clicked rapidly in what their translator indicated was intense curiosity. "You treated quantum mechanics like music?" "In a way, yes," Juan replied. "My grandmother always said that everything in the universe has its own song. Quantum particles sing too. We just had to learn how to listen." Director Shin stood up from his seat. "This is ridiculous. Quantum mechanics is governed by precise mathematical laws, not by artistic feelings about natural rhythms." "But what if both approaches are correct?" Juan asked. "What if mathematics describes the same natural patterns that artists and craftspeople have always understood?" Dr. Yoon rose from her seat to address the audience. "If I may interrupt," she said, "I have spent the last 2 days analyzing Juan's approach with our most advanced scientific instruments. His method produces mathematically perfect results, but through completely different reasoning." She activated her own display showing complex scientific data. Traditional quantum physics calculates what particles should do based on theoretical models. Juan's approach observes what particles naturally want to do and creates conditions to support that behavior. "The results are identical," Professor Kang admitted reluctantly. "But the human's method requires far less energy and produces much more stable connections." A new voice spoke from the audience. Dr. Cho Min-seok, Earth's most respected physicist, had arrived that morning on an emergency transport from the human homeworld. He stood to address the gathered representatives. "I have worked with quantum physics for 50 years, Dr. Cho said. I have always approached it through pure mathematics and logical analysis. But watching Juan's breakthrough has taught me something important about human thinking." He walked toward the stage as he spoke. "Humans are unique in the galaxy because we combine analytical thinking with intuitive understanding. We use both our minds and our hearts to solve problems. This is not primitive thinking. It is a different kind of advanced thinking." The audience listened intently as Dr. Cho continued. "Other species have mastered logic and mathematics. But humans have maintained our connection to artistic intuition, emotional intelligence, and ancestral wisdom. This allows us to see patterns that pure logic might miss." He gestured toward Juan's device. "This breakthrough happened because a human student trusted his grandmother's wisdom about natural harmony more than he trusted established scientific authority. That willingness to think differently is humanity's greatest gift to galactic civilization." Director Shin's crystal patches pulsed with what appeared to be frustration. "Are you suggesting that human intuition is superior to centuries of rigorous scientific method?" "Not superior," Dr. Cho replied. "Complementary. Juan's success came from combining human intuition with alien scientific knowledge. He learned quantum physics from your textbooks, but he applied it using human wisdom. The Valen representative floated closer to the stage. If this is true, then humans possess a unique cognitive capability that could benefit all species. That is exactly what I believe, Dr. Yoon said. Human thinking could help solve problems that have puzzled the galaxy for millennia, but only if we approach collaboration with respect rather than competition. Juan stepped back to the podium. I want to share this technology freely with everyone, he said, but I also want to continue learning from all of your species. Humans are not better than anyone else. We just think differently, and maybe that difference can help all of us discover new possibilities. The Chithari representative clicked approvingly. The human proposes synthesis rather than dominance. This shows wisdom beyond his years. Ambassador Kim stood to address concerns about control and power. Earth has no interest in using this technology to gain advantages over other species. We believe that better communication will benefit everyone equally. But what guarantees do we have? Asked the Void Dweller representative. Juan looked directly toward where the mysterious figure sat. The same guarantee my grandmother gave to everyone who learned pottery from her. She taught her techniques freely to anyone who showed respect for the craft. Knowledge grows stronger when it is shared, not weaker. The auditorium fell silent, as representatives considered his words. For hours, they had been arguing about control and power. But the human student was proposing something entirely different. Open collaboration based on mutual respect and shared learning. Dr. Cho smiled proudly at his young countrymen. This is why humans deserve a place in galactic civilization, not because we are the strongest or the smartest, but because we still remember that the best solutions come from working together rather than fighting for control. Outside the auditorium, news reports were already spreading across the galaxy. The human approach to quantum communication was being discussed in government chambers and research laboratories on thousands of worlds. But more importantly, beings everywhere were beginning to understand that humanity offered something unique to galactic civilization. A way of thinking that combined ancient wisdom with future possibilities, artistic intuition with scientific rigor, and collaborative spirit with innovative courage. The age of human-inspired science was about to begin. 6 months after the presentation that changed galactic history, the campus of the Galactic Institute looked very different. New buildings had been constructed to house the Department of Human-Inspired Physics, the first of its kind in the galaxy. Students from dozens of worlds came specifically to study the unique approaches that combined logical analysis with intuitive understanding. Li Huan walked across the campus toward his morning lecture, still amazed by how much his life had changed. He now held the title of Junior Professor of Applied Quantum Harmony, a position that had been created specifically for him. His simple dormitory room had been replaced by comfortable faculty housing, but he kept his grandmother's pottery tools on his desk as a reminder of where his inspiration came from. The lecture hall was packed with eager students. Altarians sat next to humans, while Valons in their environmental suits floated alongside insectoid Chithari. At the front of the room, Professor Kang Minho sat in the first row, taking careful notes like any other student. The sight of his former professor attending his classes still felt strange to Juan, but Professor Kang had embraced his new role as a student of human thinking with surprising enthusiasm. His centuries of teaching experience made him valuable in helping translate human concepts into forms that other species could understand. "Good morning, everyone," Juan began as he activated the holographic display. "Today we will explore how natural resonance patterns can be applied to gravitational field manipulation." A young Altarian student raised 2 of her 4 arms. "Professor Juan, how do we learn to listen for natural patterns the way humans do?" Juan smiled. This question came up in almost every class. It starts with changing how you approach problems. Instead of immediately calculating what should happen, first observe what wants to happen naturally. He demonstrated with a simple gravity experiment. Traditional methods used complex equations to predict how objects would fall in different gravitational fields. Juan's approach involved feeling for the natural flow of gravitational forces and working with them rather than against them. "But Professor," a Chithari student clicked, "our species has always relied on logical analysis. How can we develop intuitive understanding?" "The same way my grandmother learned pottery," Juan replied, "through practice, patience, and respect for the materials you are working with. Logic and intuition can work together. You do not have to abandon one to develop the other." Professor Kang stood up to add his perspective. "I have been studying human approaches for 6 months now," he said. "What I have learned is that intuition is not the opposite of logic. It is pattern recognition that happens below the level of conscious thought. Humans excel at this because they never stop trusting their subconscious minds." In the back of the lecture hall, Dr. Yoon Jae-hai watched the class with pride. As the head of the department, she had worked tirelessly to create an environment where human and alien thinking could blend productively. The results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Students were making breakthroughs in fields that had been stagnant for centuries. A Velan researcher had discovered new forms of energy manipulation by applying human artistic principles to plasma dynamics. A Chithari team had revolutionized computer programming by incorporating human emotional intelligence into artificial intelligence design. After class, Juan walked to his office where several important visitors were waiting. Chancellor Nam Yuna, the first human to hold such a high position in galactic academia, had arrived for the monthly review of the department's progress. "Professor Juan," Chancellor Nam said warmly, "the Galactic Council has asked me to discuss the expansion of the Harmony Web communication network." The Harmony Web, as Juan's quantum communication system had become known, now connected every major star system in the galaxy. Trade had flourished, as merchants could coordinate across vast distances instantly. Scientific research progressed, faster as discoveries could be shared immediately between institutions on different worlds. Most importantly, diplomatic tensions had decreased dramatically. When leaders could speak to each other instantly, misunderstandings were resolved before they could escalate into conflicts. The 3 border wars that had begun when Juan's technology was first announced had ended within weeks once proper communication was established. "The results have been remarkable," Chancellor Nam continued. "Galactic trade volume has increased by 300%. Scientific collaboration has reached levels never seen before, and we have had 6 months without a single intersystem conflict." Dr. Cho Min-seok, who had taken a permanent position at the Institute, joined the conversation. "The success goes beyond just the communication technology," he said. "The human approach to problem-solving is being applied in fields throughout the galaxy." He showed them a datapad with reports from various research projects. Altarian engineers are using human intuitive design principles to build more efficient starships. Velan artists are collaborating with human scientists to create new forms of energy sculpture. Even the mysterious void dwellers have requested human consultants for their deep space exploration projects. Juan felt overwhelmed by the scope of what had developed from his simple desire to prove his professor wrong. "I never imagined it would become this big," he said. "That is exactly what makes it work," Chancellor Nam replied. "You approach the problem with humility and curiosity rather than arrogance and certainty. That attitude has inspired beings throughout the galaxy to reconsider their own assumptions." A soft chime indicated that someone was requesting entry to the office. Click 7, now Juan's research assistant, entered with exciting news. "Juan," Click 7 said, his clicks translated into barely contained excitement. "We have received a message through the Harmony Web from the edge of the galaxy. It is from the Deep Explorer expedition that left 3 years ago. The Deep Explorer mission had been lost beyond communication range for over a year. Everyone had assumed the worst." "What do they say?" Dr. Cho asked. "They have discovered something incredible," Click 7 replied. "A natural phenomenon that appears to be a massive quantum resonance field. They think it might be evidence of an ancient civilization that used technology similar to ours. Juan and the others exchanged amazed glances. The possibility that other beings had discovered harmonic quantum principles suggested that human intuition had tapped into something fundamental about the universe itself. Later that evening, Juan stood alone in his office, looking out at the campus where students from across the galaxy worked together on projects that would have been impossible just months earlier. On his desk, his grandmother's pottery tools sat next to the latest quantum field generators, symbolizing the bridge between ancient wisdom and future discovery. A message notification appeared on his communication device. It was from his parents, back on Earth, congratulating him on receiving the Galactic Innovation Prize. The ceremony would take place next month, with representatives from every major civilization attending. But the real reward was not the prize or the recognition. It was seeing former enemies working together, watching students discover new possibilities, and knowing that his grandmother's teachings about harmony and natural patterns had found their place among the stars. The door to his office opened quietly. Professor Kang entered, carrying a small package. "Professor Juan," he said with a formal bow, "I wanted to give you something before tomorrow's advanced seminar." He handed Juan the package. Inside was a beautiful crystal sculpture that seemed to capture light and bend it into flowing patterns. It was clearly Altarian craftsmanship, but the design incorporated flowing curves that resembled traditional Korean pottery. "I have been learning to work with crystals the way your grandmother worked with clay," Professor Kang explained, listening for their natural patterns instead of forcing them into predetermined shapes. This piece represents the harmony between our two approaches to understanding the universe. Juan held the sculpture carefully, watching how it seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "Thank you, Professor. This is beautiful." "No," Professor Kang replied. "Thank you for teaching an old teacher that there is always more to learn, as..." The two professors stood together, alien and human, teacher and student. The sculpture between them seemed to embody everything that had changed in the galaxy over the past 6 months. Different ways of thinking working together to create something more beautiful than either could achieve alone. Outside the window, communication beacons across the campus pulsed in perfect harmony, carrying the conversations, dreams, and discoveries of countless civilizations. The network that had started with a simple desire to prove that faster methods existed had become the foundation for a new age of galactic cooperation. In research laboratories throughout the galaxy, beings who had once seen humans as primitive were now eager to learn from human wisdom. The age of pure logic was giving way to an era where intuition and analysis worked hand in hand to unlock the universe's deepest secrets. And at the center of it all sat the memory of an elderly Korean woman who had taught her grandson that everything in the universe had its own song, and that the greatest discoveries came to those who learned how to listen.